Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Eat Meat and Question Everything. Today, I have Michaela on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited. So, your company is D&D Beef, and don't everybody run out there and buy all her beef because I need to have some left for me. So, take it easy. But I'm excited to have you on because besides learning about all the things about cattle ranching, you also share it on social media. So, it's nice to learn and see what you're doing. And if, you're one of those that gets your beef from you, it's cool to see like what your food is out there doing.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to talk to you. So many questions. The main one that everybody wants to ask about, and maybe I don't even know if we should start there, but let's dive right in because it's such like a controversial topic right now, and everybody's asking about the vaccines in meat, specifically the mRNA vaccine.
Yes. So that is a hot topic, and it all started during COVID. And that was because of the coronavirus. So just so everybody knows, my understanding is all mammals have some sort of coronavirus. So this isn't anything new. And so what happens is there's a vaccine for that for livestock that is on the market. And that's kind of where all this stemmed from, is my understanding years ago. So first and foremost, there is no mRNA vaccine on the market for cattle. So if you see someone marketing that way, that's just, in my opinion, that's false advertising and somewhat fear mongering, because that's not even an option to do. That'd be like me saying, my beef is, pork free. Well, duh, like it's beef. And to me, I mean, I know that's a stretch, but really it's not, because there's not even a product on the market if a rancher wanted to use an mRNA vaccine. So in my opinion, moot point, moot conversation. And then that'll bring up the next conversation is people say, well, what do you vaccinate your cattle with? We are not required to do anything. So I'm not required to give a one single shot to any of our cows, but ranchers do vaccinate for certain things. A lot of ranchers work with your local veterinarian, and they're vaccinating versus certain, bacteria, viruses in your area where you live, because ranching in Nebraska is a heck of a lot different than ranching in Florida. So you work with your veterinarian, and you might give certain vaccines that cover certain bacteria, viruses, ailments, if you will, to protect your herd. It's not because nobody really wants to, but you have to protect your herd, is what I'm trying to say. So it's pretty common. Not all ranchers do the same thing. Not all ranchers give vaccines at the same time point. Some give it at birth, some give it at different stages of life. There's no cookie cutter. Everybody does it a certain way when it comes to vaccines.
And I think people are under the assumption that like all the meat is filled with vaccines, but it's like from the point of view of you guys, why would you go around and because it costs money and it's time, like why would you just willy-nilly be injecting vaccines into all these cattle?
Well, and a lot of people don't understand. There's certain diseases that will cause abortion. Your whole herd will abort their fetuses if they get this. This still happens. I mean, it's still, even though we're ranchers and we're caring for our cows, we can't protect them from everything. I know of stories of ranchers with, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps right now. Like, it's nature. Why wouldn't we want to protect our animals from an ailment that can cause severe respiratory distress and your calves will die? I'm not talking one or two. Mind you, most ranchers have hundreds of livestock. Think of 10, 15, 20, 30% of your calf crop having severe lung infections and then may not even make it to 1 year of age. That's what we're trying to prevent. And it's not a management issue. We've been in a drought in Nebraska for 3 years. And prior to this past month, we got so much rain. Thankfully, we got so much rain. We had some calves that were coughing and were having some respiratory distress because of blowing dirt in the drought. It was nothing we could do. So we had to treat some of these calves with some antibiotics because they were getting respiratory infections from the drought. We also will vaccinate them to try to, give them the best chance from an immune system standpoint to be healthy and safe. But all these things that we are doing, it's This is us working cattle, getting them in, working with our veterinarian, thousands of dollars, not hundreds of dollars, and can be tens to thousands of dollars we're investing to keep our cattle, the end of the day, is safe and healthy. Because no rancher wants to have a catastrophic event due to a health issue. That's the worst thing a rancher will ever see or deal with, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're definitely needed at times. And my understanding is once like they're out of their system by the time that they are slaughtered and we're eating them. So are we not like we're not absorbing all that then? Like it's out of there?
So vaccines are like, vaccines, and not to get into the human vaccine thing that a lot of people are talking about, but vaccines, if you do think about it, most of them are given at birth. And then for our cows, for example, so our cows are giving birth every year. They will eventually enter into the food supply system at some point. It could be dog food or it could be like a McDonald's burger. It just kind of depends on when they get butchered when they're older. But anyway, they'll receive one vaccine a year. It's a booster, and it's because they're pregnant. So it is actually for a lot of it's for there's some shots for scours and respiratory. So scours is diarrhea in calves. There's certain types of things. One of the worst illnesses as well that a calf can get. They get dehydrated. We're giving them IVs. It can be it's very hard on baby calves. So same thing, they're getting like one, maybe two shots a year, and that's actually when they're pregnant, and it's for transmission to the calf. So all at the end of the day, it's just herd health. That's what we're working on, working with our vet. Less is more, but we know we have to provide some care to a certain extent.
Yeah, and I wonder if some of like, the talk around this comes from like certain I don't know, you see like the big feedlot farms and I wonder, because people say they're like jam packed and they're not living healthy lives, so then they get sores and that's why they need vaccines. Like, do you think it's different on a larger scale like that?
Well, so my husband actually works at a local family-owned feedlot. I have a lot of family friends that own feedlots in our area, like 5, 10, 15 miles away. They're actually buying calves from ranches like us. So when people think of feedlots, I think they think of there are a few big ones in the United States. Feedlots, just like ranchers, most are family owned, and most are, when I say small, I'm talking like 10,000 head or less. And I know that seems like a lot from a general consumer standpoint. It's really not that big. I mean, it's big, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying it's not these monstrous ones. But they're family owned. They're buying calves from ranchers just like us. They're really good, healthy calves. They have plenty of pen space. They care for them just as much as we do. And they're really not doing anything different than the ranchers doing. So when, there's this misconception that feedlots are pumping their cattle full of antibiotics. That is not the case. They don't want to treat them just like we don't want to treat them. And when I say they don't want to treat them, it's that it's very stressful. Nobody wants to be giving your calves unnecessary medicine, antibiotics. And I did a social media post. It took me 1.5 hours to treat one calf last year. 1.5 hours to treat one animal. That's the same like at a feedlot. They have to go get that animal in and treat it. Now, of course, they're treating them. But my point is, I don't understand this. We're pumping everything full of everything because the no, like it it's not even, first off, if you wanted to, you couldn't. And then some people say, well, they give feed in or antibiotics in the feed. Well, that's not, they do, but that's like worst case scenario. And it's just for one pen. And I tell people, think of it like your family gets the flu, right? You got the flu and you're like, I think we need to go call the doctor and get Tamiflu. It is running through the house. We are so sick. I'm afraid we're not going to kick this and it's going to keep, you know how you can just keep passing it around? That's what happens sometimes at feedlots because of drought, wind, weather stress. You get some calves that are sick. As the population starts to get sick, you're working with your local veterinarian. You're like, hey, we've treated X amount of calves. Do you think we should give antibiotics in the feed for a couple days? And like for a couple days, or what are your thoughts? They have to get a prescription from their large animal veterinarian to even feed these antibiotics. So, it's just there's so much more behind the scenes, I think. And somebody hears, oh, you can feed antibiotics and feed. Well, yeah, you can give your kid a oral antibiotic or in a pill, or they could go get a shot. Like it's all relative. Just because you hear that doesn't mean it's happening everywhere. So it's a lot of
Okay.
information, I know, but it's not as mass used, I think, as many people believe it is.
Yeah. Okay, then what are your thoughts on, obviously I would say, support your local rancher and buy direct as best you can, but what are your thoughts on grocery store meats then? Like the quality is Ralph's, getting, meat from a farmer like you, like you know what I mean? Are there still good quality cattle that are going to the grocery stores, or are these coming from the big feedlots that we're picturing with like sick cows? What are your thoughts on that?
I always say, like, grocery store beef is safe and it is wholesome and it is nutritious. I always tell people, if you can, try to buy American beef in the grocery store because, first off, 80 to 85% of the grass finished, not grass fed, grass finished beef in the grocery store is overseas. It is
Really?
not here. So
Do
that
they
is
Sorry, do
what
they have to label it that? Like, so we wouldn't even know?
you wouldn't even know. So this was a huge thing. I think it was in March of this year. They just passed. Okay, I'm gonna take a step back. So if you big companies can ship in carcasses, so like literally a half a carcass of beef, process it here, slap a USA label on it because they're processing it in the United States. I think it even goes down to trim. So think of like cubed meat and fat in like a vacuum seal. I think even if they ground it here, American label on it. Now I can't remember where the line is, but I know it's in regard to processing. So processing, fabricating, they call it fabbing beef. So you can have like a whole primal and cut it into steaks and America sticker on it. Okay. So they passed a new law that is changing. I don't think it takes into effect. I maybe 2026, maybe. Um, and I'm not saying importing and exporting beef's bad. That's important for the cattle rancher too, because there's people overseas that pay premium for American raised beef. Like I'm not bagging on the, imports, exports. No, no, no. That's good for us. I don't like the falsifying of the product. So they are changing that now. But right now, grass finished beef in the grocery store, I'd bet you it's probably not from here unless it says, Courtney's beef, Colorado, grass finished. Like that's different than if you're just buying your local grocery store beef and it just says grass finished and has an American sticker on it or not. You don't know where it's coming from right now. So, yeah,
That's interesting.
it is interesting. So anyways, but I tell people grocery store beef's good if you can buy American raised. And my friends are ranchers, my friends are feedlot owners, and I know they do a good job. Like I've been there, they are doing a great job. Why there's differences in quality, consistency is because look at how there's so many ways to do ranching, which actually can be confusing from a consumer standpoint because I ranch differently, my family, excuse me, ranches differently than my neighbor down the road, than the rancher across the county, and sure as heck different than the rancher that lives by you because of environment, breed, your breed of cattle, what type of feed do you have around you. I mean, there's so many variables. All that factors into quality, taste, and so many things. So then when you go to the grocery store and you get your beef, they might have got it from a packing plant by me, then they go get it from somewhere else, and there's just it's a wheel of constantly changing, beef that's coming to them, so your quality is just going to vary. I wouldn't say that it's bad for but that's why sometimes you get a great steak and sometimes you're mad. Even though it looks good, it might not taste very good. So
Yeah, it's crazy how an animal like a cow can have so many different tastes and flavors. Speaking of that, though, what are your thoughts on grass fed? I mean, so I think we can all say like all cows are grass fed, right? It's just depending on how they're finished.
yes.
So, what are your thoughts on grass finished versus grain finished? Because I'll add that I don't always love the flavor of grass-finished beef. To me, it can taste I've had some that literally taste like fish, and I've heard that it's like the omegas in the grass, I don't know, so I prefer grain-finished, but then you hear a lot of people say, like, it's not as nutritious, and you have to have grass-finished and this and that, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, so first I'll say like grass and grain finished beef, like they both have their place. Like if you like grass finished beef or you like grain finished beef, like more power to you because they're both wholesome, nutritious, good for you. My first thing is don't feel like you have to eat grass finished beef for the environment or from a nutritional standpoint because when you break down grass and grain finished beef, the like your fatty acids or your omega 3s and your omega 6s, like I'm talking maybe 1 gram difference. It's not, I mean, if you want omega 3s, omega 6s, like some of these other things, like eat a piece of salmon. Don't try to make beef be salmon, right? Like beef is beef. Eat it for the zinc, the iron, your vitamin B12, like your choline, like treat it like that. It's not fish. Just put, quit trying to make it feel like that that thing you want. um and from an environmental standpoint, that's the feel good that I feel like people are being guilted into making this choice of consuming grass finished beef. That's where I have the problem with it. I'm using air quotes here. Because all beef's grass finished, or excuse me, grass fed. It's that, like you just said, how long, all these variabilities, which is awesome, which we should be applauding. That means that there's still so many ranchers raising cattle. It's not big business yet, and it's not just 4 guys doing it from start to finish. But that, from a consumer standpoint, makes it a little confusing because, like I said, I do it different than my neighbor down the road. Um, Grass and grain finished, they both have their place from a carbon footprint standpoint. I'd argue grain finish actually is less. And the reason why is because grass finish takes longer to finish out. Their cattle are actually a little older when they're finished. And depending on where they're getting grass finished. If they're being grass finished in the state of Nebraska, we don't have a year long growing season of grass. We just turned our cattle out to pasture 2 weeks ago. We have a very hard winter. The growing season ends in the fall. So even if we were grass finishing, we're still feeding them with a tractor. We're harvesting that hay and grass hay that they're still eating grain or grass finished. But I'd argue that our carbon footprint could arguably be more because we're feeding them with equipment and stuff longer than if we were finishing them on grain. Now, I'm not saying that, I mean, you choose either way. I just don't want this like rainbow effect to kind of cloud people's judgment. Because if you like grain finished, it's okay. You're not doing anything wrong, is my point. You're not going to kill the environment by eating grain finished beef, and you're not going to save it by eating grass finished beef. So that's my 2 cents on grain versus grass.
Yeah, I love that. That's good. I mean, I think and some people benefit from the grass finished. I've heard like if they are like having autoimmune issues and sensitivities that sometimes that may work better.
Yep.
So, but yeah, if you eat what you love and can afford, that's what I say because it's all going to be super nutritious and it's all going to be way better for you than a standard American diet
Yeah.
anyways. Um
Well, and I will say that goes to, I'll have people that say, like, I bought from so and so. Why is your beef better? Why is your beef not as fatty if it's grain finished? And I'm like, I've started to tell people beef's like wine. Wine starts with grapes, beef starts with cattle. What happens from that start to finish product can change the variability so much. Just because I'm raising Angus and red Angus beef with my family, and Joe's raising Angus and red Angus beef with his family, we will still have 2 completely different products because we're both doing it differently. So when you talk about people with autoimmune diseases, or maybe they're like, well, I tried grain finish from a rancher and it was too fatty, try it again from someone else, or find the brand you like at the grocery store. We can't just buy grass finished once or grain finished once and just assume, oh, that's what it's going to be like every time either. It does take some shopping around. So to your point too, if people are trying to find like, and and just buy ground beef first too to try it out, and then you'll know. But you do have to do a little shopping if you're buying direct from a rancher. It might take a little bit if you're trying to find flavor profile if you're being a little more specific. Just do think of it that way. You're like trying on shoes. You might have to try on a couple pairs first. So,
Awesome. Well, back to the environment, because that's, of course, a hot topic in this. But I also want to ask then, like, is your farm considered regenerative farming then?
so I say it is, and that's another thing too. Every rancher and farmer, well, I shouldn't say every, most are regenerative, sustainable to a certain percent. And I'm not saying that to, you know, to each their own, but there's certain people who really try to do more. And also they usually live in warmer climates. It's a little harder when it's colder to do, some people will have multiple species grazing and all these things. I know there's some bigger farmers that do that and they're in southern states, which is awesome, but they're warmer year round. I'm in Nebraska and it can be -20 and 8-foot drifts in February. So we are regenerative and sustainable. We do some cover crops. We do rotational grazing. We spread manure out on our pastures. We try to do all these things to better the environment. And I'll argue most ranchers are doing some of this to a certain extent as well. Even feedlots are doing this too. They're spreading manure and they are doing cover crops if they have cover crops as well. But with that term as well, there's just varying levels of how much people are one able to do or into just can based off of where they live in their environment. So, but yes, we are.
Okay. And yeah, back to then more the environment stuff, because that's another like thing that I see, like, oh, eating this way is ruining the environment as they're eating avocados that are like flown across the world. So let's talk about, cow farts and how they're ruining or not ruining the planet.
So, with methane, so what it is it's methane, and what is caused by that is, so cattle are ruminants. They actually have one stomach and four compartments. And so what they're doing is they're chewing, they are consuming forage. So when I say forage, I'm talking grass, hay, roughage, okay? Any sort of roughage. When they're consuming that, they're releasing this methane. Well, their methane is naturally broken down in the environment and is basically comes back down. And then that's where they always say, like, you'll see the image where it rains back down and goes into the ground in this circle, right? So the problem is people started trying to group the methane cattle were producing with cars. Well, when cars emit methane in these emissions, those don't break down in the environment. It's not natural. So, cattle only present or cattle are producing 2% of greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation's like 30%. And if you look at like food waste and clothing waste, I mean, those are more important topics that need to be taken care of. Cattle aren't ruining the environment. Humans are in the aspects of how wasteful we are with food waste in the United States too. I think it's like 40% of the food is wasted, which blows my mind. And then I read a statistic that said per person per year, like 81 pounds of textiles end up in the landfills. So that's like your clothing. And I feel like our single use plastics and those footprints from humans are way more important to be addressed than cattle's natural life cycle. Bison were here before we were here in, the United States and producing however much methane. Like, I don't think we need to really be worried about livestock right now. That's my 2 cents on that topic.
Yeah, our focus should be on other things. And, people are probably typing that out on their iPhone, like there's just other things to be concerned about. So it's like, why are we, why are they so focused on this? Is it because they're trying to take our beef and now go into the, Bill Gates lab grown and whatever he's doing, buying up all this property? Like, what are they trying to do? That's just so
I
weird.
I personally think that, and lab grown meat, like I don't understand, when you talk about other countries that don't have the protein, okay? Like in your countries that don't have like running water, like your countries that are, severely malnourished and stuff, like, okay, I'll bite. Like if you're looking at it from that standpoint, I'll bite. Like I understand a little bit. I see what they're trying to do. If you're saying that you're trying to maybe produce more meat, um, and maybe that's a way, like, I'll listen, you know what I'm saying? But I don't like this whole Beyond Meat thing. I don't the first ingredients in that soybeans, and Bill Gates is one of the largest landowners in Nebraska. So, and it's primarily farm ground, and he has a plant-based meat. I don't even like calling it like meat, but a plant-based protein company. Like, what I mean, yeah, I just think that they're trying to push people to this because of the money and the incentives behind it. That's my 2 cents. I do think sometimes some of this started with good intentions. Like I said, like maybe looking at making protein to give to other countries where they do have a need for it. You know, I could see that, but I think that's not where we're going now.
Yeah, and that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk about the landscape a little bit more. Just thinking about like arguments that I get on, from my understanding is cattle can be raised on certain landscape that you can't even grow crops. So that and the fact that cattle can also eat, like, because an argument I get is, um, I can't even like word this right, but that like, oh, they're growing all this to feed your cattle, but the cattle are actually like eating some of the plants that like we can't. Am I making sense? I feel like I'm
Yes.
not. Okay.
Okay. So I know you're kind I believe, so correct me if I'm getting this wrong. But first, so if you look at the Western United States primarily, so if you're looking at Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, I guess it'd be like the northwestern part of the country, and actually I take that back. Also Nevada, um, dry, arid climates, not prairies, but there's some plants there. Okay. Those places have land that can be grazed, but cannot be farmed. So it could be rocky, altitude, Idaho, Montana. Think of your altitudes, your mountainous areas. Like you're not getting a tractor anywhere near those areas, is what I'm trying to say. Or if you go south and they call it like the desert areas, people run cattle out on that ground. It cannot be farmed. Cattle can consume that forage out there and they're converting it into protein. So like you're taking land that now granted there's wildlife and stuff out there too, but I'm just saying if you're looking at the land itself, it can literally be used for nothing except for what it's being used for right now. So that's one of the arguments. And you'll hear some people will say like BLM, it's Bureau of Land Management. These are those places where technically the government owns the land, but ranchers can lease it out and run their cattle on and graze it, which is a good thing because that helps reduce wildfires. This is that all that area. Okay. So that's that land where they say it can't be used for farm ground, but cattle can turn it into a protein, is basically what I'm saying. Um, and then when you'll look at people, so I live in Nebraska, there's a lot of corn around me. People are like, you're just raising corn to feed the cattle. Well, yeah, the corn's being used for cattle, but also there was an ethanol boom. You know how your gas, when you're getting gas, it says 10% ethanol. That comes from corn. Um, and so corn's being raised for lots of things. Hogs, pork, or excuse me, hogs and chickens and turkeys, they eat grain. They have a monogastric stomach. They aren't ruminants. So when they're being finished, they are getting fed grain. They're not consuming forage. So there's other animals eating this food is what my point is, the crops that are being grown. And then one of the regenerative sustainable things we do is we run our cows on corn stalks in the fall. So after the corn's harvested, the combine literally just takes the head of the corn, like your ear of corn, and then it shoots out the back, like all of the roughage. That entire corn plant is basically chopped up and kind of kicked out the back, for lack of a better term. Our cattle graze that and they like it. That plant material. They're eating the leaves, parts of the stalk, not the entire stalk itself. As it gets lower, it gets tougher. But they're eating that. That benefits the farmer. Our cattle are fertilizing the ground. And then studies have been shown that it'll actually increase the ground's potential. Every year you have cattle on it, you can see an increase in yield when the cattle are grazing it. So what that means is the ground will perform better for the farmer as our cattle are grazing it the following years. So,
Awesome. Yeah, just to I mean, my question was a little wonky. You answered it, but just to like
okay.
clarify, I guess where it was coming from is I get a lot of um, the vegans that are upset about us eating cows and it's like, well, you guys don't think about all the critters that are killed to grow your
Yes.
crops and their argument back is, well, the crops are grown for your cattle. And that's kind of where I was going with that where it's like,
Yep.
well, they also eat the things that the humans aren't. Like, yes, we're growing corn so you can grill it, but then our cows are, eating the stuff that is not edible.
Yeah, and I mean, Nebraska has a really high deer population. They wouldn't be here if how am I trying to say this? The deer population wouldn't be existent if farming and ranching was really impeding their growth, right? And I am a person who I believe we ranchers and farmers need to be cognizant of the natural ecosystem at stake too. Like they call them tree belts. You know how like behind your house or something, you might have like a line of trees to break the wind. Like ranchers will do that with their farm ground and their pasture ground. And I think we also need to keep in mind the wildlife around us as well. Like we have coyotes, deer, beavers, like raccoons. There's bobcats by us. There's been mountain lions that have actually made their way down by us, which isn't common in our area. But my point is like our ecosystem seems pretty healthy. We have turkeys and pheasants, so we need to be cognizant of them as well. And of course, there's going to be some life lost, but that is as a steward of the land. I think you can tell a good farmer or rancher by what wildlife is in their pastures and fields as well. Because if they're not, they won't be there. That's my personal opinion.
Is there anything that you think like the beef industry in general and ranchers can do to be better and just improve anything?
At no, actually not really, because I went to school at South Dakota State, and a lot of my friends are ranchers up there, and they rely on South Dakota is very big for pheasant hunting. Ranchers up there plant crops for the pheasants to consume. So you'll see strips of it's called I think it's milo and sorghum. They're types of grains ranchers because they know it's good for another economic benefit to rural South Dakota, but they're actually doing that to protect the wildlife anyway. So where I see, in Nebraska, sometimes I wish that there was a couple more trees around or some people would leave a little bit. But the states that I'm pretty familiar with from an agriculture standpoint, they actually do a pretty dang good job because they know how important all these other factors are as well. So where I'm at, I'm I feel like we're doing a pretty good job. You could always do better, right? I mean, you could always argue everybody could do better with everything, but I feel like from a ranching perspective, we do pretty good.
And is there anything as consumers that we can do to help better, support the cattle industry? Like, is grocery store meat, like, is that still okay to do? Should we really try and buy direct? Like, what's the answer?
I feel like, and especially, years ago before inflation and stuff happened, I would tell people like if you can buy local and buy direct, like in my opinion, that would be the most direct impact. But I know money is so tight and it's so hard for everybody right now. I feel like none of us, from an inflation standpoint, like we're all still kind of holding our breath a little bit. So if you're unable to, I just, buying the beef in the grocery store, if you can get it with a USA or American label on it, even though you might not be 100% sure, you're still showing that grocery store that you want to support an American based rancher. I still think that's really important too. And I also tell people too, it's an election year. I'm talking local elections, really important to pay attention to who you're voting for. I've seen there's some like politicians out in California who want to get rid of confinements. So that's like I hate this word like industrial ag and such, but that's actually small family dairies that they're still saying are like these big operations. So it's really important to pay attention to who you're voting for because if they do that, there's going to be a couple 100-year-old dairies that are family owned and literally be like my family that they're going to shut down if they pass this based off of legislation. So I think legislation is really, really important too. A lot of people in office have no idea what truly goes on with agriculture, and they're the ones making the laws. So that's a really another important thing to pay attention to, as well. And especially local governments, it's really important.
Awesome. So much good information. Thank you. Is there anything you want to leave us with, like any misconceptions you want to clear up or anything that we didn't touch on that you feel like it's important that people know about?
I think it's just important that everyone understands like cattle start on family ranches just like us. Even if they're fed in the feedlot, they're not just consuming corn, they're still consuming forage. Grass versus grain finish, both are healthy and nutritious. And just don't be scared to buy beef. Like you're not hurting the environment, it's good for you. And also, if you ever have questions, like that's why people like you and I put ourselves out there. I always tell people like if you want to find somebody local, I will try to help you. The ag community is actually pretty small. And just don't be afraid to ask some questions and no questions too silly. We just want just like what you're doing here is amazing. You're just trying to help people better understand, how protein's good for you. That's still my job. My main goal at the end of the day is like red meat's okay. You can have it more than once a week. And if you want help finding some, I will do my best to point you in the right direction. So,
Awesome. And we will have some links like in the show notes and if you're watching on YouTube in the description because you have some good informational graphics and charts, right? That
yeah.
you want to share.
Yep. Yes, I can
Awesome.
send those over. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And if you want to let everybody know where they can find you.
Oh, you can find me. It's at D Beef on Instagram. That's my website as well, and Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for
Awesome.
chatting with me today.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. All right. We'll see you next time, guys.